Welcome to Bent Not Broken, where we empower and motivate women by sharing real-life stories of adversity and provide expert advice on how to overcome those obstacles and help you live your best life. Now here's your host, Juanita Kelly.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 14 of Bent Not Broken. I'm your host, Juanita Kelly. Have you ever put yourself into a relationship that you knew was unhealthy or one that wasn't a good fit for you just so you can say you are no longer single? I know I'm guilty of that. I chose to be coupled with someone that I knew was not a good fit for me just so I could be a member of the I'm no longer single club. Ultimately, these types of relationships never work out as they're destined to fail from the beginning. Is there a reason why we can't be happily single instead of coupling with a partner that doesn't complement us? Some of us can't stand to be alone with ourselves, and we let the fear of being alone shape our decisions and partners. Is it possible that our greatest love affair can be with ourselves or even with a dear friend? On today's episode, we'll be talking about living the single life with author and empowerment coach, Acamea Deadwiler. Today's episode is entitled, Embracing the Single Life. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to Bent Not Broken podcast. And today we have the pleasure of having Acamea Deadwiler join us. She is the author of Single That, Dispelling the Top 10 Myths of the Single Woman. Welcome, Acamea. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Acamea, you have accomplished a lot in such a little bit of time. You're a freelance writer and an entrepreneur coach. You're working as a therapist as well. Tell me a little bit about what motivated you and inspired you to write Single That.
What motivated me was just seeing more and more of the negative perceptions that I learned that we have about single women in general, as a society. And on both sides, both men and women. And a lot of it has to do with what we've been brought up to believe. Women have been mostly brought up to aspire to marriage and family. And that's great. I don't have anything against it at all. But I believe it's gotten to the point where we view not being in that circumstance as one that is less than. So we've started to view ourselves as less than if we are single or if we can't have children or choose not to have children. It just really bothered me the way that I see it wear on some women's self-esteem to the point where we'll get into unhealthy relationships and things like that just to say that we have someone because we don't feel good about ourselves when we're single. And I was just like, hey, I don't like that our relationship status is kind of attached to our sense of self-worth. And it was something that I wanted to address and inspired me to write Single That for that purpose.
Now, when you sit back and you think about the process that you went through when you were writing the book, what were some of the points in your life that motivated you to sit down and put those points into the book?
Some of the points in my life were, at the time I had been single for a while. And so I started to learn more about these views through dating and just friendships that I made while I was single. Guys that I dated would start to ask questions like, oh, so you're going to be single for forever, or you're going to be 50 and saying the same things that you're saying now. And it wasn't even anything outrageous. It would be questions like, oh, well, do you want children? And I would say, yeah, but, I'm not just going to have kids just to have them. I want the situation to be, ideal and conducive. There are no absolutes. You may think you're going to build a life with someone and then it doesn't work. But I at least want that to be the intention and to choose, who I have children with. One guy's response to that was, you're going to be 50 saying the same things and not have any kids. And I was just like, okay, and if that is the case, isn't it worse to just do something to because you feel like that's what you should be doing and end up in an unhappy or unhealthy situation than it would be for me to be 50 and without children? And so it's just this idea that, there's these negative connotations attached to being single as though it's a circumstance that we should avoid. And the longer that I was single, I started to really get that from all sides. Even, sometimes going out with friends, it would be like, oh, the single friends here. Let's find someone to hook her up with.
I remember those days. Yes. Isn't it something that we as women, we do? We try to hook up our single girlfriends because we want them to be in a relationship. But sometimes it's okay to be single. We don't
do.
have to be in a relationship.
Right. And I'm not mad at it, especially if you are single and looking and you want a relationship, you can appreciate, being hooked up. But it's just this idea that it becomes all that you are, like now suddenly you're the single friend, never mind everything else that you're doing that you have going on in life. Maybe you want to talk about other things sometimes when you go out, but somehow the conversation always comes back to you being single. And from the standpoint of it being a circumstance that needs to be remedied, as if it's a problem that needs to be fixed. That's my biggest issue with it, that you can't just be single. You certainly can enjoy it and you can't be content. It's like, you're single. We need to change that.
Now, let me ask you, have you ever had this situation where you're single and you're dating, you find yourself settling for a relationship with a guy just so you are no longer single, just so you can say, I have a relationship? What about women who do that? What kind of advice would you tell them so they can start finding happiness within themselves?
Yeah, my advice would be, and that's one of the major reasons that I wanted to write the book, because that really just like hurts my heart. The fact that we feel so horrible about being single that we'll make these decisions just to say that we're not single. Never mind the health of the relationship. If we're happy, if we're being treated properly, it's just the fact that we can say we're not single anymore overshadows everything else. So my advice would be to get comfortable alone. I think once you become comfortable alone, you're less likely to make those types of decisions because you don't have that urge to not be single anymore. Even if you want and desire partnership and love and marriage and all of those things, just being comfortable alone will help you make so much better decisions because you don't have that apprehension to being single or that mindset that this is something that I need to fix. When you're comfortable alone, you make decisions based on what you want and what brings you happiness and what brings you joy. And so you'll meet and you'll connect with and choose someone who adds that value to your life because you're not afraid to be alone. So that would be my first step, is to get comfortable alone. It may not be easy in the beginning if it's something you're not used to, but like anything else, if you give it time and you really invest in learning how to be comfortable and feeling as though you're enough just as you are and on your own, you'll get there.
So how can you find a healthy relationship when you're out there in the dating world and you're dating this guy and or perhaps even you're dating a female, whatever your preference is? How do you know that the person you're dating is the person that you should start to settle down with?
That's a great question because I don't think there's a set checklist. I love the idea of just being open to life happening. Like, I don't want to sit down and say, okay, the person has to check boom, boom, boom off my box. Check these boxes for me to say this is the person I want to settle down with. I do have standards, and certain criteria that I feel needs to be met, but it's more of a broad thing as far as, the way that you treat me, your character, integrity, things like that. But I don't want to have like, oh, he has to make this amount of money, much money a year. He has to live in this neighborhood, drive this level of car, things along those lines for me to know that this is the person that I should be with. So I don't think there is like a set rules or criteria for you to know. I think it's more of a feeling and being honest with yourself and looking at who you are when you're with this person. And if you look at this person and in this relationship and you feel like you are the best version of yourself or better version of yourself than you are without them, then I think that may be the person that you can look at and say, okay, maybe I should build a life with this person and settle down with them. I think all of our decisions should come back to how it makes us better and improving upon ourselves. And if you feel like you are a better version of yourself in this relationship and with this person, and they bring out the best in you, they build you up instead of breaking you down, I think those are key indicators that possibly that's someone to settle down with.
Now, last year you wrote an article in Medium, and it was entitled "Your Great Love Story Might Be with Your Girlfriends." Tell my listeners, where did this idea came from for this for this article that you wrote?
The idea came from, I was watching, I don't know if you used to watch the television show Girlfriends when it was on a few years ago. Okay. Yes, that was my show. So, they had a reunion special not too long ago where they were talking about the show, and, it ended abruptly because of the writer's strike and things like that.
Mhm.
And Tracy Ellis Ross said something that really resonated with me because she was talking about what she would do with Joan's character, who, was the consummate single character in the show, but very career driven. It's that scenario where as a woman, you've achieved a lot in life and career and business, but your love life seems to never measure up to that.
Mhm.
So her being that character, she said what she would do with Joan's ending, because when the show ended, she was engaged, and she was saying she doesn't think that she would have Joan's ending be her getting married and having children, because she thinks it undermines the idea of being whole, alone. And she was saying how she has great friends and things along those lines, and she doesn't rank those relationships any lower than she does, romantic relationships in real life. This is how she feels. And it made me think about my relationships with my girlfriends. And I've been fortunate enough to have some great, supportive, healthy relationships. I hear horror stories about, women friendships where somebody did something unforgivable and there's all these fallouts and arguing, all these issues. And I've been fortunate enough to never have that. I've had the same friends for about more than 20 years now.
Wow.
And we're just, and we're just as close as we've always been. There's never been any like huge fallout or huge issue where someone betrayed anyone or anything like that. And just made me think like, what if your great love story is with your girlfriends? And we tend to place, romantic love and relationships above those other relationships. But I think they are just as important, and they can be just as fulfilling if we allow them the space to be that, instead of automatically placing them below, a romantic relationship or partnership.
Now, right now we're in a global pandemic, and it's difficult to maintain relationships. It's difficult to, before you can pick the phone up and call your girlfriend and make an appointment or a time together to go have lunch and go shopping or whatever you might want to do. Now, since we have this pandemic, we don't have those luxuries anymore. And it's just really hard to keep the connection. How do you stay connected with your girlfriends?
In the beginning, I think when we really didn't know what was going on and how severe this was and how we could protect ourselves, I think it was more difficult. And because a lot more businesses were shut down, a lot of them are starting to open back up, and it's become more of a matter of what you're comfortable with. But in the beginning, I did go long stretches without seeing my closest friends, the ones that live in the same city as me. But she would drop by and bring me paper towels and tissue because,
you wanted to make sure you were stocked up.
Yeah.
That's friendship.
Because, that's love right there. Like, you went to the Walgreens at 6 a.m. and, fought to get me paper towel and tissue. Like, that's love. So she would come and she would, sit it outside the door, and we would talk through. I have a screen door. We'd talk through the screen door and just keep in touch. Yeah, keep in touch that way. We would talk on the phone. And same thing with, my close friend that doesn't live here. We just talked on the phone a lot more. I FaceTime with my friends. So I just find a way to stay connected, especially if you live alone. You may very much still need that interaction and that connection. So I say just find a way, even if it's over the phone or through FaceTime. Now that things are opening, I do meet up with my friend on occasion, not as frequently as we'd like to. We'll just be safe and wear masks and socially distance, find a place where we can sit outside. I live on the West Coast, so the weather is nice enough to sit outside. Yeah. Yeah, or we may get takeout and, sit outside and still just try to be as safe as possible, because I think that connection is important. It's also important to be safe and healthy, but, your mental health is paramount as well. And sometimes those relationships and connections can help preserve that. So I just think, if you're feeling alone or you're feeling, too disconnected from other people and the people that you care about, is just find ways to do it safely and do what you need to do to maintain that connection, so that you can also maintain your sense of well-being, your internal well-being.
How do you find a happy medium between spending time with your girlfriends or the person you might be dating?
I think it has to be important to you. Number one, Because, I've seen it both ways where I've had friends before where they get into a relationship and then you don't see them for
Mm-hmm.
6 months,
Until the
and
relationship
then,
is over. And then you see them all
right.
the time.
Right.
Yes.
Then the relationship is over. It's like, oh, I have time for you again. And, I'm going to come cry on your shoulder. And of course, you're going to let them because you
Of
love them
course.
and you care about them. But it can be hurtful,
Mm-hmm.
to just be kind of dismissed like that. So I think if you have girlfriends and those relationships are important to you, I think it's important that you keep them as paramount in your life. Of course, you understand someone else is going to get more of your time now. So maybe we're not hanging out or talking as much as we normally do. But I think it's so important to not just put those people, those friends that have been there for you on the back burner, because, number one, it's not fair to them to be kind of picked up and put down whenever you feel like you need them. And then number two, if those people are important to you and you love them and you care about them, I think it's just important that they always know that, whether you're in a relationship or not. So I think finding a happy medium is first being with someone who understands that these relationships are important to you and communicating that. I kind of consider myself kind of independent. I don't normally get codependent, and people that I'm with know that I enjoy healthy space. I think space is healthy for a relationship, and being able to hang out with your friends is healthy for a relationship. It just has to be someone that you can trust. When I say that I'm with my friends, you trust that I'm with my friends, and not
Mm-hmm.
doing something else. But I think it's just a matter of communicating first with your partner so that they know that these relationships are important to you, and just reminding yourself, of these other people that are still important in your life, and you want them to always feel that way, even once you get into a relationship.
Now let's go back to your new book, Single Dad. Now, the title of it again is Single Dad, dispelling the top 10 myths of the single woman. Tell me, which myth bothers you the most?
I think the myth that bothers me the most is the idea that a single woman, especially a single woman who's no longer in her 20s, is broken somehow. People
Mm.
start to look at you and say, well, what's wrong with you? Why are you single? Why haven't you found someone to marry you yet? Why haven't you had any children? As though it's an indictment on, who you are or your worth or your wholeness. So I think that's the biggest one to me, because we're making decisions about women based solely on that one aspect of her life. She could have everything else together, be financially stable and free, be a great person, have her life in order, you be mentally and emotionally at peace and healthy. But because she's single, we make so many negative determinants about her based on that. And it goes back to tying her relationship status to her self-worth. So you look at her being single and assume that something's wrong with her. She just may be broken somehow, or why can't she keep a partner? When it can be the opposite, like, why can't partners keep her?
Yes.
But yeah. So the idea that because if you're single and and you're getting older, towards the age where people think you should be married, people naturally associate that with there being something wrong with you or irrevocably broken. And I think that's the most harmful, because sometimes we can start to believe those things, and start to feel like, well, what is wrong with me? Why haven't I found the one yet or gotten married? And all of that starts to weigh in our self-esteem. And when you think about it, it's based solely on the idea that you're single. And I just don't think that's a big enough sample size to base such a profound generalization on.
Mhm. How can women become more comfortable being single?
I think you have to figure out, who you are and what you enjoy, independent of anyone else. If you're used to being with someone and around people all the time, you naturally kind of cater to what they like and what they enjoy, and you have to consider feelings and what they want to do. So you naturally, and that's fair, relationships are about compromise. But if you're always doing that, if you always have to consider someone else, you never really get the opportunity to learn who you are just in and of yourself. What would you like if you didn't have to do what other people like? What would bring you joy if you didn't have to consider how someone else felt about it? And I think that's how you get more comfortable alone and single, is figuring out what those things are. Think about when you feel most alive. What makes you happy? Do you like reading in the morning? Do you feel good after you go for a run? Do you like to sketch a little bit? And if you don't know what those things are, I think that's all the more reason to take time to yourself and figure it out. Go to some classes, go to some yoga meetups, and go see a matinee movie on your own and see how you feel about that. I've done it before, and it may be a little weird in the beginning because you think like, oh, everybody's going to be looking at me and they're going to think like, oh, she doesn't have anybody, and she's alone, she's lonely. You have all these reservations and being self-conscious about it because it's kind of been ingrained in us that there's something abnormal about being alone. But there isn't. You really need to get to know yourself best before you can really invest in knowing someone else. So I think the best way to be comfortable single, and if you're, alone and not dating, is to figure out what brings you joy, what makes you feel less alone in the world, as opposed to, sitting on the couch every night crying into ice cream or something because you don't want to be single. Just figure out how you can feel content with that status, learn who you are, and then do as much as possible of those things that bring you joy and make you feel whole just as you are.
That's wonderful. You gave us such a great overview of how you can handle the relationships that you have with your girlfriends, as well as dating relationships, as well as loving yourself, which you sound like that is what's the most important thing, is to find love for yourself.
Yeah, I think everything that we do, every decision that we make, every relationship that we have comes back to the relationship that we have with ourselves. Even if we're in a relationship and we're being treated poorly, the remedy isn't to figure out why this person treats us this way. It's to figure out why we accept it. Why do we stay in this relationship? Why do we continuously choose people who treat us this same way? So I think everything comes back to us, and learning who you are is the key to loving yourself. It's the key to making healthy decisions on your own behalf. It's the key to being more content alone. And it's the key to a healthy relationship, because if you love yourself and you know what you need, and then you can communicate that to your partner. And then you can also know when they can't give you what you need. So the better you know yourself, I think, improves all of your relationships, and especially the relationship you have with yourself.
Well, you shared some tremendous insight with us today. I want to thank you for joining us. How can our listeners find you online?
Oh, thank you so much. This was great. I am at Acamea LD. That's ACAMEALD on all social media platforms. You can visit my website at acameadeadwiler.com, and you can get Single That: Dispelling the Top 10 Myths of the Single Woman on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or any online major bookseller.
Well, thank you for joining us. I really, really enjoyed our talk today, and I learned so much. I appreciate you coming aboard.
This was great. Thank you.
Thank you. On the next episode of Bent Not Broken, we talk with author and therapist Iris Weichler about female infertility. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
This has been Bent Not Broken with Juanita Kelly. Thanks for listening. You can find us online at www.bentnotbroken.co, all major podcast platforms, and YouTube. Be sure to follow us on social media at Bent Not Broken Podcast.